It's not a basketball team. This is birds of prey. We do a lot of hawks, owls, and eagles. Eagles are making a comeback in Ontario, but they're not living near as long as they should. A bald eagle in the wild can live anywhere from 35 to 45 years. But around the Great Lakes area here, they're only living about 15. And part of the problem is lead poisoning, and the other part is botulism. The lead poisoning, strangely enough, is coming from gut piles that are left by hunters in the field. The hunters oftentimes will dress a deer in the field and leave the gut pile behind, which is for coyotes and eagles, which is a nice thing to do. But what they don't realize is that the ammunition they're using, the lead in the ammunition, once it hits a bone, is fragmenting. And it gets into the gut pile. And it only takes a piece of lead, maybe a quarter the size of your baby fingernail, to kill a bald eagle. Wow. We've had several bald eagles over the years that have come in with lead poisoning, and fortunately we've been able to save a lot of them. But sometimes you can't. They just come in, it's too late, and it's already gone systemic, and there's nothing really you can do at that point. Owls are just amazing. They are so smart. They almost know what you're going to do before you do it. And those tufts up here, those are not its ears. Those are feather tufts. Their ears are right down here. And that parabolic dish you see on their face is very specialized. They can focus that so that they can draw the sound into their ears. If you could hear like an owl could hear, it would freak you up, because they hear stereo differently than we do. We hear it left and right. They hear it left and right too, but they also hear it this way. That's really strange, isn't it? Try to imagine that. And they have one ear that points up and out, the other one that points down and out. So their stereo spectrum is amazing. And they can turn their head 270 degrees. So start here, move all the way around, all the way to here. It's pretty incredible. And all those feathers that are along its face here, those light brown tan feathers, those are all specialized to help draw the sound into the ear. And so they use their ears as well as their eyes. They have a lot of rod cells that collect light, and if you took a little birthday candle and put it on the 50-yard line of a football stadium, it was so black you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and you lit that birthday candle, that's enough light for that owl to be able to see a mouse at the goal line in the corner of the stadium. So they fly silently too. Their feathers are amazing. I had the opportunity to look at owl feathers under an electron microscope a couple of years ago. And the feathers are very specialized. The leading edge of the feathers, first of all, have a comb, and it helps to break up the sound coming over the leading edge of the wing. The laminar surface of the wing, it looks like a wheat field that's been blown down in a high wind, and that absorbs the sound as well. So if this room was totally black, and we released an owl from that corner and he flew here, you would not hear him as he flew across the room. They're pretty incredible. We used to, years ago, we would take dead mice that we would be feeding the owls after we had released them, and we'd just hold it up in the air. We knew we could hear the screech owls. They'd be in the trees, and they'd be kind of chortling to you, and we'd go out and hold the mouse up, and you couldn't even hear them coming, but all of a sudden you'd feel this pressure on your hand, and the mouse was gone. And it's pretty amazing. Well, how can we help? There's a number of things we can do. You know, too often we blame big business and whatnot on pollution and things that harm wildlife. But there's a lot of things that we can do right in our own backyards. You know, the problem oftentimes isn't that the raccoon's getting into the garbage. The problem is that the garbage is letting the raccoon in. Yeah. And if we just fix that problem, you know, part of the challenge is that these little critters are so smart. You know, even our dogs, I mean, they're really smart. You ask them if they want to go for a walk, and they get excited, and they start wagging. Darn things understand English. But I would put wild animals just a step above our domestic animals in intelligence, because they have to be intelligent enough to survive in the wild. Their life every day depends on living on the edge. And so they've developed this intuitive sense about them that is really remarkable. When we work with the wild birds, when we go into their pen, we just have to check our own emotions. Because if we're a little bit rushed or feeling anxious about something, they pick up on it just like that. Any of you who are horse owners probably know all about that. But they do. They just pick up on it, and you're in for a rough ride if you're not prepared emotionally and mentally to work with those animals. Leaving our cats in at night. You know, we love cats. I have a cat at home. He's a rescue cat, and we taught him how to be really happy indoors. And if you can do that, your cat's a lot safer. He's not subject to a lot of the diseases that are out there that he can be bringing home. A lot of them are zoonotics, in other words, transferable to us as humans. He's not going to be hit by cars or trucks out on the road. The average life expectancy of a cat that's happy indoors is significantly longer than that of one that is allowed to roam at night. So we would ask you, for the sake of wildlife, to consider that with your own cats, to bring them in and to keep them in at night. You know, it's a hard road in the beginning because you keep them in after they're used to being running around at night, and they'll try to convince you they're going to die unless they go out. And the good news is they're not going to die. But with time, you can, and there's websites out there with some wonderful ideas. We put a bird feeder out by our picture window at the farm, and our cat sits on the couch and just watches those birds, his tail going back, and we call it kitty TV. That's great. Let wildlife find their own food. You know, that the exception is when winters are really harsh like they were last year. But for the most part, wildlife doesn't need our help to find food. They have that sense about them that they know where the food is. They're just going to go where it's easiest. And the unfortunate part is that we're feeding them things that aren't really good for them. If you have to feed wildlife, especially ducks and geese, when you're down by the river, take cracked corn with you instead of bread. They love it, it's better for them, and they'll like it just as much. I'm going to bring out a wildlife ambassador. I want to tell you a little bit about him. Shakar is a lager falcon, and he's not native to Canada. He's native to East India, but he was hatched out here in Canada. And what happened was we got a call one day from a jogger who was out underneath, running through a wooded area. He just happened to look up, and there was a falcon hanging from a rope on this tree branch. And what had happened was Shakar had escaped from his owner, who was training him to be a falconry bird. And he escaped with a leash. And when he landed on the tree branch, the momentum of his forward motion allowed the leash to wrap around the tree and he couldn't get away. Falcons have a very fast basal metabolic rate. And if they don't eat often, they're in trouble. We figured, to the best of our knowledge, that he probably hung up there for 4 or 5 days. He was so weak he couldn't even stand anymore. He was just hanging by the leash and swinging in the wind. And we brought him to Salt Haven. We didn't expect him to live because we kind of thought that he was in third-degree emaciation. In fact, we thought that we should probably euthanize him. Once a body's in third-degree emaciation, you may even get the animal back up on his feet, but they usually die of dysfunction, liver dysfunction or kidney failure, because those organs have been compromised in that whole process. But after 4 days, Shakar started to rally, and he actually stood up, and we thought, well, maybe. And then he started to eat on his own. We didn't have to tube him anymore, and that was pretty incredible too. And then finally, he recovered fully. We can turn the lights on there if you like. When Shakar first came to us, he was still a baby. He was less than a year old. And as you're going to see here in a minute, he's changed quite a bit. His chest back then was very dark, and now it's quite white. His cere around where his nares are and his feet, as well as his eye rings, are yellow. Now, who would have thought yellow eyeliner would work, right? But it does for Shakar. And and now he's mature. He's 10 years old, and he's been with us all that time. He loves school kids. We don't know what the situation is there, but he just loves school kids. And he's entertained school kids right across southwestern Ontario now for the last several years. They are very, very fast. We clocked Shakar 2 years ago on the straight level at 119 kilometers an hour. Whoa. He can dive at almost 250 kilometers an hour. That's faster than you can drive. I don't care what kind of car you have. If you're familiar with Bernoulli's principle, Bernoulli's principle says that any air going over a curved surface quickly creates a low pressure system, and that low pressure system creates lift. If Shakar was diving at 250 kilometers an hour, the air going over his head would create such a low pressure system that it would suck the air right out of his lungs and he couldn't breathe and dive at the same time. But nature has provided him with something really ingenious. Little scramjets inside of his nares. In fact, I don't know if you can see them there or not. Just that little thing peeking out there. That's a little cone. And that allows the air to flow even faster into his lungs when he's diving so he can breathe and dive.